Let's do that hockey.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dauber Prospects Radio Podcast. This is going to be episode 120. I'm your host, Peter Harling, as always. And today's episode, we're going to be talking about a lot of Kingston Frontenacs players. I talk a little bit about, I mentioned the Kingston Frontenacs at least once every episode. It's been hard not to this year with Shane Wright on their roster. But the Frontenacs have not only Shane Wright, but they got a couple other draft-relevant prospects. And they also have a number of fantasy-relevant prospects, as they had about 6 or so NHL drafted prospects on the roster. And they had themselves a pretty good season by Kingston standards. So I'm going to spend this episode talking about Kingston Frontenacs players. Be a lot of Shane Wright talk right off the top for all you draft nuts out there. And to join me on this episode, I couldn't think of anyone more qualified than Allan Etmanski. He is the host for Kingston Frontenacs. He's the Ron McLean of Kingston Frontenacs hockey. And he's also a pretty knowledgeable hockey fellow himself, being the assistant general manager of the Picton Pirates. So welcome to the Dauber Prospects podcast. Allan, thanks for coming on.
Thanks. And I've got some big shoes if I'm being compared to Ron McLean, so no pressure.
Yeah, right. Ron's pretty good.
Whether people love him or hate him, he's a legend.
How could you not love him?
Yeah. He's part of growing up in Canada. It's like you come through and you get your Tim Hortons, your hockey stick, and then your dose of Ron McLean.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, he should be on our currency.
He's there. I'm sure if you say that, there'll be somebody that'll get out there with Photoshop and kind of do something up, and before we know it, it'll be circulating like those ones we saw with the Trailer Park Boys on them.
Yes. Well, hey, if anyone listens to this episode and you're savvy with that kind of stuff, tweet it at me, or the podcast at DPR_show. And if you want to tag my guest on it, Allan's Twitter handle is at Allan Etmanski, ALLANETMANSKI. All right, so Allan, let's get into it. Let's dive headfirst right in and just go right to the cherry on top and start talking Shane Wright. So,
who's that?
I think he's a Hawks player. Some people may have heard of him. We've been talking about this kid since he was 14, 15 years old, playing in the GTHL with the Don Mills Flyers. Played his way into earning exceptional status about, off the top of my head, I think he was the 6th or 7th or so player to be granted that distinction and enter the Ontario Hockey League at an early age. And lucky for us, the Frontenacs pooped the bed the season before and got the first overall pick, so we got to watch him, I want to say for 4 years, but we really got hosed there with the pandemic, eliminating an entire season of Shane Wright, which was devastating for the Frontenacs.
How Kingston, right? Like you get this superstar talent, and then something that's once in a lifetime happens and wipes out a year and a half.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about COVID. So he missed an entire season, his D-1 year, and then came back and was the consensus number one. I mean, like, pretty much no matter who you talk to at the start of the 21-22 season, all the draft pundits pretty much unanimously had Shane Wright as the runaway number one, first overall consensus draft pick. You'd be hard pressed to find someone who could have made an argument for someone else. And that's on the strength of playing like 7 games with Canada at the U18s. And so let's start there. He had a really impressive U18 tournament as his draft -1 player. He was influencing the game in a number of ways, specifically offensively. And he was dominant as an underage player. And it really got people excited about what he was going to do in his draft year.
It was super impressive too, when you consider, like we talked about, he had the tail end of his rookie campaign cut off. And then gyms open, gyms closed, rings open, rings closed, up leading up to that. So whether or not he had ample time to train or get into any type of game shape, we don't really know. And so for him to get to that tournament and put on the showing that he did, I was super impressed with what we saw.
Right. And he was not the only player that was subject to those terms and conditions, right? Like the entire hockey league was locked out for the entire season. The WHL had a very abbreviated season, and the Q was on and off. If my memory serves me correctly, but they played the most games.
Yeah, it was all over the place. So like you had to have a notebook, and it would have been filled with stops and starts.
Yeah. So they were all in a pretty similar situation where it was a raw deal. So it was kind of a level playing field that way. But what was most impressive to me was that he was, he's a year younger than the majority of the players on that roster, and they're the cream of the crop. So then we fast forward a little bit, and the OHL comes back. We played a full season. There was a little bit of no attendance for a month or so there with just empty rinks, and they only played interconference. They only played in the Eastern Conference. They didn't play any Western Conference teams, but those were the only real restrictions on the season. So he played a full season, and he took a lot of scrutiny in the first half of the season, particularly for not blowing our socks off offensively. I mean, he was good. And he got better as the season went along, but he didn't finish over 100 points, and he wasn't even the Frontenac's leading scorer. So now that we go through the whole season, we get to the end of the year. The question is he still the number one ranked player? I'm not sure how familiar you are with some of the other players in the draft, but Logan Cooley has played his way into the conversation, and so is Juraj Slafkovsky. He had an incredible performance at the Olympics and then again at the World Championship. So how did you feel about Wright's start, the duration of the season, his finish, and how do you see him right now?
So I think what a lot of people need to realize is that a lot of opinions are based just on numbers. So people look at the numbers and they say, well, it wasn't a standout year for a kid like Shane Wright, who's expected to be the first overall pick and this exceptional status player. And he did have a slow start. There's no question about that. But then you touched on the whole scenario of what they were coming back from, having not played really anything outside of that under 18s for a year and a half. You've got two groups of rookies coming onto a team. You've got a rookie head coach in Kingston. There's gelling going on. He's being rotated with different line mates for the first 2 months. Maybe I'd have to go over my notes again more thoroughly, but I know that he was seeing a regular dose of new line mates throughout that year, seeing time with Ludwinski and Soto. And I think he even saw some time with Arcuri. And so it wasn't his usual line mates. And a lot of times forwards play like a set line and they kind of get into a groove and some chemistry and stuff. So it took a little bit of time for them to get that figured out. And then just as he starts to hit it, everything gets disrupted again because he goes off to the World Junior Camp, and then he's back at square one again. And I'm not overly surprised that he went away to the World Junior Camp and then came back and really started to take off, because if you go back to his rookie season when he went away for the under 17s, he started slow that year, went away to the under 17s, and then came back as a different player. And so it was a similar case here. He went away to the World Juniors and his role got changed a little bit just because of the depth on that team. But when he came back to Kingston, Zayd Wisdom was there, and all of a sudden they have that trio of Wisdom, Chromiak, and Wright reunited for the most part. And all of a sudden stuff starts clicking again for him. They start to get on a little bit of a roll. And that's a big part of why he finished so hot for the Kingston Frontenacs. And then you look after the regular season and into the playoffs, and he wasn't setting the OHL playoffs on fire by any stretch, but he was consistent every single night. And yeah, he maybe wasn't showing up on the goal column, but he was doing a lot of stuff away from the puck and in his own end that really added up to the big picture. So I was impressed with how he was able to handle the season, because often with these draft eligible players on top of it being your draft year. You've got the pressure of it being your draft year, but then when you're an exceptional player who's expected to go number one, there's all that additional pressure. And you've always got the commitments of the big TV networks coming in, wanting the interviews, all that kind of stuff. So all in all, I think for having not played really consistently in a year and a half and then coming into that and dealing with it, I think it was a pretty good year for him.
Yeah, I think it was a good year for him too. Now, you mentioned at the beginning there that a lot of people are looking at his stat column and saying, disappointing, and not really watching the games. And, not too many people watch more Kingston Frontenacs games than you. You certainly watched more than me. So I can understand what people would say that. There's been games where I've watched and, he didn't really stand out. He didn't have any end-to-end rushes. He didn't score any Michigan-style goals or,
Well, hey, there was that one he set up in Oshawa there where he's behind the net and stuff. I don't know if it was planned, but it was highlight reel.
Yeah, no-look backhand.
Yeah.
How did he even know that guy was there? And that was a very pretty goal. But those were not an every night thing. So you could watch a Kingston Frontenacs game and then at the end of it walk away and say, I don't even really remember seeing Shane Wright very much. But then you look at the box score and he's a +2 and has an assist.
and it's funny you say that because there were nights this year where I'm watching the game and I'm thinking, oh, Shane had a quiet night. And then I'm going over the score sheet afterwards and it's goal, assist, +3, solid on the draws. And I'm like, well, no, that's Shane Wright's game. He may not wow you every night, but it's just the consistency that really jumps out at you.
Yeah. So he's drawn some comparisons for all those draft pundits out there to players like Patrice Bergeron or maybe Jonathan Toews, that kind of thing. I don't think he's as aggressive physically as Jonathan Toews. And I don't think he's going to win 5 Selke trophies like Patrice Bergeron. But I mean, he's got Bergeron upside. If you put Shane Wright in a situation where he was playing in the NHL with players like equivalent to David Pastrnak and Brad Marchand, I think he could statistically, offensively, I think he has the upside to be very parallel to what Bergeron has been for the Boston Bruins. Now, Bergeron was, I think, a second round draft pick. Shane Wright's going to go no later than probably second overall in his draft. So again, there'll be that burden of expectation that'll be on his shoulders. But I mean, he's been playing with that for 4 years now already, since he was 15 years old. So I wouldn't worry about that.
I do like that comparison to Patrice Bergeron because Bergeron's going to be a Hall of Famer by my books. The guy's got 5 Selkies to his name and just the best two-way player in the NHL. And if he can go out there and consistently put up seasons like Patrice Bergeron, he's not going to be Connor McDavid. Wow. But Patrice Bergeron is still pretty darn good. And that's something Montreal hasn't had. They now have it with Nick Suzuki a little bit, but they haven't had it really in any type of form since Guy Carbonneau.
Yeah. I mean, what's Bergeron done? He's won Stanley Cup, about half a dozen Selke trophies, a
couple gold medals,
gold medals at the Olympics, the World Juniors. Not sure about World Championships or not, but probably. It's all right. I think he walks in the front door of the Hall of Fame in his first year. I think he's a first ballot guy.
If he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer, whoever is on the committee that year needs to be fired because there's not a centerman in the NHL in the last 10 years that's better than him.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is coming from a Habs fan, so it has to be true.
Exactly right. I'm probably going to get my Habs fan club membership revoked for that, but it's true. And you know what? I'm not one of those Habs fans with the blinders on. I'm pretty good at calling a spade, and that's what Bergeron is. He is that solid two-way guy.
All right, so clearly we're both enamored with Shane. We think he's a very good hockey player. He might not be a Wayne Gretzky or Connor McDavid, but I mean, I don't think you can hold that against the guy. It's not too many people that that can fall into that category. So other players have also had exceptional status and made it to the NHL. John Tavares and Steven Stamkos, they're not in the Gretzky category, but they've had very good careers. And while I think Shane is a different kind of player, I think he could have the same sort of impact as those two guys. He's certainly going to be better than Sean Day.
yeah.
Sorry,
that's
Sean.
one of the that's one of the problems with the exceptional status tag, I think, is that these players come in and then all of a sudden people are thinking that we're seeing a Gretzky or McDavid. Like Ekblad, Aaron Ekblad had the exceptional status tag, very solid defenseman, one of the top in the NHL. He's not out there doing Cale Makar things, but it doesn't lessen his skill level at all, right? He's still at every night. He's probably top 2 defenseman on the Florida Panthers. Yeah, he's just not grabbing the headlines like a Makar.
If he could stay healthy, it would help his cause. All right, so I think so. I mentioned that you're a Montreal Canadiens fan, and do you see a scenario where Montreal selects someone not named Shane Wright first overall?
I think it'll be either Wright or it'll be Cooley. You need depth and strength down the center to win in today's NHL, and Montreal has lacked that for years and years and years. And now you've got an opportunity to draft a legitimate center with your first overall pick. There's talk they might have a second pick or trying to get one, but you've got the number 1 overall pick right now, and I don't think you can go and draft a winger. You've got wingers in your system. You need that number 1 center, and the thought of a duel of Suzuki and Wright down the middle is it's pretty enticing for me as a fan, but I think just as a hockey mind, you look at that and you think, well, there you go. That's your center position for the next 5-7 years at least.
Oh, for sure. I don't think it would make sense for them to go on the wing either. And they do have a number of pretty good defensemen. Caden Gooley just led Edmonton to a WHL championship, and our Arbor Jack guy did the same thing with Hamilton. Too bad he didn't get traded to Kingston, eh? So do you think there's a scenario where maybe they take one of the defensemen and Nemec or Jiricek?
I don't think so. They've got a ton of defensemen or defensive prospects in their system right now.
Right.
And the future in that regard looks bright to them. The one area that they are weak on is down the middle, and they lucked out getting Suzuki. I don't know how that all transpired, because to me that's a huge win for Montreal to be able to pull that trade off. Like, he was just a throw-in in the deal.
Take the money and run.
Yeah, and so now he's their number 1 center, and probably it looks like possibly their next captain, and you're going to get a shot at Shane Wright here. And I think if you're Montreal, you have to draft either him or Cooley.
Right. Okay, so let's put on our hypothetical hats, and you get promoted from the assistant GM of the Picton Pirates to the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens in the next 2 weeks here, before the NHL draft. Who do you pick?
I go Wright.
How come?
He's the complete package to me, and he's probably going to be the most ready to jump in, and see what he's like in action wise. There's not a whole lot left for him to prove at the junior level. I know he's missing the championship and stuff, but in terms of everything else, he's competed and he's put up the numbers and passed the test. And even this year, he faced a whole lot of adversity. There's the whole facial injury that he had there early in January. There was COVID and that kind of stuff that he was able to overcome and still have a great year. Like, everybody talks about how he had a slow year. He still put up 90 something points this year. Like, that's ridiculous. Most players would love that. I know that there's a couple guys who are getting looks who didn't even come close to that. Mm-hmm. And so for me, like, watching him night in, night out, I've had that 68 game viewing experience. And just from a game to game standpoint, like, he's the most complete player at that center position right now in that draft.
Right.
I don't know if I'd say he's the most complete player, if you take into account the wings and stuff. But like at the center position, I would say he's probably the most complete.
You said he's the more ready to jump right into the NHL right away. So let's talk about that for a sec. It bothers me that there seems to be this unwritten rule that if you're the first overall pick, you gotta jump right into the NHL. I think it's been detrimental in recent seasons for a number of players. Yakupov. But Buffalo did a good thing this year of breaking that rule, breaking the mold, and allowing Owen Power to go into college. Do you see a scenario where he doesn't return to he doesn't join the Montreal Canadiens and go into the NHL right away?
I certainly think that's a possibility. And part of this is the rule where you have to either go to junior or stick with the NHL club, right? I know why the rule's there. I get it. They want kids playing and stuff, but I still think like you can learn a lot by going down to the AHL and playing there as well, and getting an expanded role too, and playing against similar competition to what you'll see in the NHL. Whereas if you come back to junior and you dominate again, well, what's it doing for your game? Like you can develop bad habits that way too. And I've seen players do that where they come back and they just have a great year statistic wise, but there's terrible habits developed. And we've seen it here in Kingston where guys, they're older, they're NHL draft picks, they send them back and then they wallow away in the ECHL or one of those minor pro leagues and never really make a career out of it. So I think especially with Montreal this year, I think there is a benefit to having him up there because they're going through that rebuild and they've got a ton of young talent who are all going to be similar to him. Guys like Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield are going to be around, and Caden Primo too. And these are young guys that he's going to be able to learn around.
All right. So you not only do you draft him first overall, you're throwing him in on opening night, eh?
I would. I think, hey, he's gonna get a taste of that at the draft. Montreal drafting first overall in Montreal, where there really hasn't been a whole lot to celebrate this year. It's going to be bananas that first week in July, and especially that first night. He's going to get a taste of it there, and I think come October, I think it's October they're starting this year. I hope it's October when the NHL kicks off this year, but I'd like to see him in the lineup, similar to what Anaheim did with Mason McTavish.
So what if, he just doesn't look ready, plays a couple games, is not impactful, doesn't look ready? Where does he go from there? I mean, he's an OHL player, so the rules are he's got to go back to junior. Do you see a scenario where that happens?
I do. I like he would absolutely fetch a haul for the Kingston Frontenacs if he came back to junior. I don't know. It depends on how the season goes too, right? If he comes back to Kingston and they're having a great year, he might want to be part of that run. But he also could wind up getting dealt too. That's always something that's happened. These guys come back and they get moved. We saw it this year with Mason McTavish, came back and Peterborough dealt him to Hamilton, and that worked out all right for him. But I do think that with what Montreal's going through right now, and they've got a guy like Marty St. Louis at the helm, I think that it could be beneficial to have him there and have him around. Now, if he comes and he struggles significantly, like it's hard to watch, then yeah, you send him back. But something tells me that's not going to be the case with him. He's the type of guy that really, if he comes out and struggles in that first game, he's gonna take it and he's gonna find a way to be better in that second chance.
All right, yeah. So Shane Wright, looking like the number one overall pick. I had him ranked 1. The Hockey News had him ranked 1. Elite Prospects had him ranked 1. Chris Peters ranked him 2, though. So there are some people out there that are doubting him, but I think those people are wrong.
Like it wouldn't shock me if like Logan Cooley went 1 or the other guy, I can't think of his name off the top of my head. Yeah, Slavkovsky, if he went 1, but I do think that Shane Wright for Montreal is the best fit. And there's one story out there, and I can't remember where it was from, but Shane and his dad, it was either in 2000 or something around there, played a game of golf, and the dad beat Shane. And for that next year, Shane worked and shaved 20-ish strokes off his game, which is insane to do in 12 months. And that's the type of player I said if he has a bad game, he's going to go back and he's going to work and he's going to work and he's going to work to be better that next game. That's the type of attitude that he's got. And he's been through the rebuild in Kingston, so he's got experience going through that. He's got experience in top power play minutes, big face-off, big moments, that kind of stuff. And he's got that what can I do to get better attitude, which I think is all beneficial to a team going through a rebuild, which is why I think he's a top pick for Montreal.
It's funny because I've heard that story too. And you know what it made me think of immediately was Sidney Crosby. And two examples. After a season once, I think Pittsburgh lost in the playoffs or didn't make the playoffs, whatever it was. And people were criticizing Sid for his shot. And I heard that going into that next season, that all he did all summer was work out and practice his shot. And it was markedly improved. Like it was night and day how much better his shot was. And then a similar scenario with him where he spent an entire offseason just working on faceoffs and he became dominant on the faceoff. So, you know, there's a nice Shane Wright to Sidney Crosby character, personality comparison. That's a good person to be compared to. And
it's something you can't teach. The player just has to want it and has to want to go and get better. And Sidney Crosby is perfect idol for that. And Shane Wright appears to be following in that same mold.
That's right. Okay, so let's give some love to some of the other guys because there's a lot of other players on Kingston we could talk about. Let's focus on the draft players still, and let's talk about Paul Ludwinski. So this is his first draft eligible year, and it was hard for him, I thought, to find quality ice time given the depth that the Frontenacs had up front, especially with the veterans that they have. They're all aging out of the OHL this year. So, it's hard to beat those kind of guys out of a roster spot. So he was pretty much buried on the third line, barring a couple of instances where there was injuries where he had glimpses in the top six. I was really impressed with what I saw and the role that he was asked to play as a third line center. He wasn't asked to carry the offense. He was asked to provide supplementary offense and provide energy. And man, he's really good at that, at both those things. And then in the playoffs, he really, really raised his game to another level. And I think gave us a really good glimpse of what to expect from him going forward. And I really think that caught the eye of some NHL scouts and moved the needle a little bit on his draft rankings. I have him ranked in the second round. I got him 43rd. Elite Prospects is 45th. Chris Peters is 49th. The Hockey News has them down 76, but they had to have their stuff submitted a little bit earlier, so that might not include the playoff rankings.
So I'll say that I had him around late third round before the playoffs, and the playoffs came and he bumped himself up into the second round for me, just like you guys. I've got him probably middle of the pack in that second round, just on what he's done. I will preface anything that I say by saying that this year in the NHL draft, more so than others, there's going to be a lot of misses and a lot of hits for these guys because you're getting drafted based on your OHL rookie season. There's not that adjustment period for some of these guys. Like Paul Ludwinski, he was drafted, missed out on his true rookie season, right, and then had to play his rookie season as his draft year. So really they have his minor midget season and then his OHL rookie season to base their NHL draft. And so you're going to see hits, but you're also going to see a lot of misses this year with guys like Paul Ludwinski. That's not to say I think he's going to be a miss because I loved what he brought, especially when all the chips were down in the playoffs. Yeah,
for the most of the season, my only real knock on him was I'm just not sure what his finishing abilities are, right? Like he's got a pretty good shot, but does he get himself in positions to use it often enough? I mean, it's a good, quick, hard shot. How accurate is it? Those were some of the concerns I had with his scoring abilities, and he really put those to bed in the playoffs. He scored prolifically in the playoffs and in a variety of different situations too, right? He scored some greasy goals in front of the net, but he also scored some goals at range too with a nice shot. And not only was he scoring goals, but he was also setting them up too. So really moved the needle in the postseason there for anyone that missed it.
And there was a goal in the playoffs that he scored where he broke in off the wing and got some separation between him and the defenseman, and then made it a power move right in front of the net to kind of beat the goalie. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know he had that in his arsenal, because oftentimes he got lost in the shuffle throughout the regular season. Early on, he was playing with Shane Wright, but then got the wheels going a little bit in his rookie season, and head coach Luca Caputi shuffled things up a little bit. And often he was the guy that got moved through the lineup to kind of balance things out when Kingston started getting injuries. He started on the top line, got moved back, and then some injuries happened. And so then they slotted him back up through, and he was kind of getting rotated similarly to what Shane Wright saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a player that it's in the NHL that he kind of reminded me of a little bit at times is Zach Hyman. And when he was with the Leafs would do that too. They would move him up and down throughout the roster, and whenever they needed to shake things up, he was the catalyst that they'd throw on a line to try and get some energy on it, get it going. And I kind of feel like Frontenac did something similar with that. Like Hyman, he's got good offensive skills, but not elite, but good enough to play with elite players. And that's significant.
And he's got the willingness to play the physical game if he needs to. You talked about gritty goals and like those garbage goals. He's not scared to go to the front of the net or go into the corner or anything like that. And then routinely, like I've talked to him, and he says, "Oh, I get a big smile on my face if I have to go in there and win that battle and come out with the puck." So that's something that they talk about intangibles, and you can't teach that. The player has to want to do that, and it's no problem for him.
Yeah. So he'll have another 2 years of OHL eligibility to him. So he'll get drafted in the second or maybe the third round, not the first and not the fourth. He's not good enough for the first and too good for the fourth, but there's lots of picks in the middle there, and he'll slide in there somewhere. And then have a couple more seasons of junior before he's fantasy relevant. So another player, though, that is eligible for the draft coming out of Kingston that'll be going into the pros next year is Lucas Edmonds. And this is a player who I really enjoyed watching this season, because right off the bat at the start of the season, he showed his skill. I was a little bit concerned about his skating, but I don't think it's great, but I don't think it's a problem either. So interesting story on him. I wrote an article on him for Dauber Prospects, that this is a kid that comes into the OHL as a 20-year-old overage rookie that's draft eligible. And it's like, how is that even possible? But it was. And he led the Frontenacs in scoring, and he almost led the OHL in scoring with, I think it was 109 points, is what he rounded up with, something around that. So as a 20-year-old, I think he'll get drafted. I have him ranked in the second round as well, late, a 61st overall. Hockey News has him at 72. Chris Peters and Elite Prospects didn't rank him in their top 3 rounds. What are your thoughts on Edmonds? Where do you see him going?
So I had a little bit of a cheat sheet with him, because I knew his dad from my days in North Bay when his dad was coaching the junior A team there. And so I knew that what they were kind of getting when they announced that he was going to come over, and lived up to what I expected. I think he caught some teams off guard, because there was that unknown factor, right? He's coming from Europe, didn't really have the greatest of years in Europe. And really excelled here in the OHL this season. And I think if he's a North American player, he probably gets drafted in his normal year. And if not, he gets that free agent contract. But because he's from Europe, he can be drafted as a 20-year-old. And I like you, I think probably late third round. It wouldn't shock me if it's early fourth round. But there are stories out of the combine that guys have hurt their stocks and whatever. So it wouldn't shock me if maybe a player like Lucas gets elevated a little bit and maybe goes earlier in the third round.
I could see a team like Seattle being very interested in him, because they've got, I think, half the picks in the second round, And they have a AHL affiliate that'll be the first year. So they were sharing an AHL affiliate. They've only had one draft. So they don't have very many players that they can graduate from the junior ranks. So I think they'll be looking for players exactly like him, players that they can draft, that they can fast track up the ranks a little bit, and they don't have to wait 2 years for them to turn pro. And
there's a Kingston connection in Seattle, a couple of them actually, and they were at multiple Frontenacs games this year.
Yeah, I saw Ron Francis there in the playoffs for a game, so they were getting a good look at him, and pretty friendly with one of their local based scouts as well, and he hinted that they were interested in him, that they like him. It's just a question of perhaps how much and what round, and if there aren't any other overage players that maybe fit in a little bit better or not. But he's definitely on some teams' radars. And even if he didn't get drafted, I don't think that would be the end of the world for him, because then he would have the opportunity to sign a contract with the team of his choosing if he had any sort of preference there.
Yeah, and he's definitely going to wind up with an opportunity somewhere. There's no question about that. Probably going to get drafted. We say probably because we all know that anything can happen when you get to the NHL draft. But I think he's definitely going in the top 4 rounds.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's been plenty of players who didn't get drafted that I was surprised. Linus Newman is a good example of that. I was kind of disappointed he wasn't drafted.
And there's been guys that get drafted. I'm just like, really?
Yep. Okay, so another thing I like about Lucas Edmonds, and I kind of mentioned this, is that he's going pro right away. I don't think he'll jump into the NHL by any stretch of the imagination. But if you're in fantasy purposes listening to this episode and you're thinking about players who you can draft in your fantasy roster if it goes 3 or 4 rounds of NHL draft deep, the great thing about him is you don't have to wait 3 years to find out if he's going to bust or not. You know, you don't have to burn a prospect roster bench on him for 4 years and then throw him away and waste all that time. You know, you'll know in a year or two if you've got a keeper or not.
Well, and he comes in having played against pros already from his time over in Sweden, so he's got that under his belt too.
That's right. Another player who is not going to be drafted, that was an overager for the Frontenacs and signed as a free agent, is Jordan Frasca. And he had a really strong season, scoring 87 points in 67 games, 42 goals, 45 assists. And I think he made a really good choice signing with Pittsburgh. They have one of the more shallow prospects pools in hockey. So his quality of competition to crack that roster won't be as bad as if he signed with, Colorado or Minnesota or Ottawa.
He had a great year in Kingston. The only thing that worries me a little bit is that he kind of started to disappear in the playoffs for Kingston. When the
he was suspended for 2 games.
yes in the Oshawa series.
That's right. So there's that.
But
hard to stand out from the press box.
But overall, I just felt like in the playoffs he kind of got lost in the thick of it a little bit.
Yes, I could see that. And as an overage player, that's not what you want to see. One thing that I did see that he didn't really drop the ball on in the playoffs was his dominance on the face-off dot. When they had a draw that they needed to win, he was the guy that was taking it every time.
And that's key for Kingston because they struggled mightily this year. So if you've got a guy like Jordan Frasca who's consistent on draws, even if he's just out there to take the draw and you're getting him off, like that's so critical in the way that the game is played these days is face-offs, because it's all about possession and having possession. And if you don't have to go to fight to get that back, then you're already ahead in that department.
That's right. So what do you think his NHL upside is? I mean, he's only 1% Fantrax owned, so I mean he's pretty much widely available in leagues. Some leagues you won't be able to sign him as a free agent. You might have to draft him. But is this a player that he'll be turning pro? So even if you went out and on a whim you added him to your roster, you won't, like I said with Edmonds, you won't have to wait 4 years to find out. You'll know in a year or two. Do you see some NHL upside on this file?
It's so hard to say just because of the situation and stuff. But I think he could be a guy that sees some games sporadically throughout the years. But I don't think he's being an NHL guy until probably year 3. I think probably he's spent some time in the AHL and has to put in some solid time there before he gets the call up to the Penguins on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think he could eventually find his way to the NHL. I think the odds are a little bit against him. The percentages of him making it, I think, are on the low side. And for fantasy purposes, I'd be a little bit more concerned because while he scored 40 goals and 40 assists as an overager in the OHL, he didn't really like super dominate offensively, and he's got good offensive abilities, but not great. He'll make it more as a two-way player, and in fantasy, that's not great. And I don't think he'll provide you a lot of peripheral stats either. Like he's not a banger. So there's that.
Despite a 2-game suspension.
Yeah. Well, everyone has moments of poor decision-making. That was one of them. Okay, another player I want to talk about is Martin Chromiak. He's next on the scoring list on the fronts. 44 goals, 86 points in 60 games. Property of the Los Angeles Kings. He was a later round draft pick from a couple seasons ago. He's played the last 2 seasons with Shane Wright, and he's looked really good doing it. The kid has an NHL level shot. Like this guy can shoot the puck like an NHL player right now. My only concern with him, and it's kind of a big one, is if he's not shooting the puck, is he contributing any other way?
And that is a completely fair assessment if you've watched his game, because there's times where he's setting up in his spot. He loves that left circle, the one-time shot off that left circle.
Yeah.
But oftentimes there's plays in the corners and he kind of backs off from it a little bit and he doesn't get involved.
Yeah, his compete level has left me wanting sometimes. Let's say that.
And you know what? You can get away with that at the OHL level, but not at the NHL level, because you're playing against men who are competing for jobs, and it's a completely different beast.
Absolutely. Yeah. The OHL this year was a pretty passive league. I mean, there was talks during the COVID season that they canceled that maybe they would allow the OHL to play if it was a non-contact season. And I don't think all the players got the memo that wasn't a rule this year.
Yeah, you didn't see
particularly.
Yeah, you didn't really see a whole ton of that physical play. Like some nights you did if it was an old school rivalry, but more often than not, like the games were relatively tame.
Yeah. The next player I want to talk about, really kind of more of the same here. Francisco Arcuri, Dallas Stars prospect, 34 goals, 74 points in 66 games. So another fine season. Very talented, skilled player. He can really handle the puck very well. My impression of him from his rookie season was he avoided physical contact at all costs. As a rookie, he looked very intimidated on the ice and overwhelmed from another number of perspectives, but specifically physically. And while I saw improvements this year is this his final year? I think he's got one more, doesn't he?
Yeah, he would have one more.
Right. So this would be his D+1 season with one more to go. So, he's asserted himself a little bit. He showed better ability to protect the puck and insulate it against physical play. But it's still a concern that I have. What's your take on Arcuri?
I was in the same boat as you. I kind of and he shouldn't be a guy that's kind of shying away, because he's got the stature to go in and kind of absorb a little bit of physicality, right? Like he's not a small guy. He's got some size to him, and if he wants to use it, like he could have that. He could be, if you were to give him like the skill set that Paul Ludwinski has, like I think that would solve a lot of the problems. Like if you could have like a hybrid between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's got, as you mentioned, Curry's got that the stick handling and those fine maneuvers, and Ludwinski's got that drive and that willingness to go into the tough spots.
Right. Maybe I'm just not so sure about Ludwinski's puck handling abilities.
Well, that's what I mean. If you could have could take the puck handling from our Curry and combined it with Ludwinski, I think you'd have the perfect. They're the complements to one another.
You'd have a Zayd Wisdom.
You would have a Zayd Wisdom.
Which is the segue to the next player I want to talk about. Arguably my favorite Kingston Frontenacs player. I have just absolutely loved the way Zayd Wisdom's game has progressed. It has just been a rocket ship straight up. He came in as an OHL rookie, and well, he had a lot of Charlie hustle in his game, and he tried really hard and he competed really hard, but he didn't really do anything. And Kingston was a terrible team, and
I was going to say nobody that year did really anything.
Right. And they ended up last overall and got Shane Wright. And then the following season he played with Shane, and a lot of people saw his statistical production really elevate and then just say, oh, well, of course, what's the difference? He's playing with Shane Wright this year as opposed to last. And I'm like, yes, that's true. He's playing with Shane Wright and he wasn't last year. But if you watch the games, you'll notice that he is not a passenger on that line. It was Wisdom, Wright, and Austin Wong until Martin Chromiak came over about midway, and then he bumped Wong off that line. And the three of them just exploded and were absolutely dominant.
And you know what? It was Wisdom driving the offense some nights. Like,
absolutely.
You've got Chromiak and Wright, who are like these high level finesse guys, but then there's Zayd Wisdom. He's going in the corner and digging those pucks out front of the net, taking the hacks and the whacks to kind of make stuff happen.
Yeah, and the biggest problem I had with Wisdom in his rookie year was his puck handling abilities were below average, quite frankly, at the OHL level. Like, he had hard times accepting passes that weren't on the tape, and carrying the puck or skating and stick handling and avoiding traffic. And by the end of his second year, all of those concerns were put to rest. Those were all strengths in his game. So he had just really developed incredibly in his second season. Then his third season, there was no OHL. So he went to the American Hockey League and looked like a pro-ready player there. He's one of Lehigh Valley's best players that season. I was shocked that he came back to Kingston this year. Now, he missed the first several months with a significant shoulder injury. And when he came back, he was still obviously dealing with some fallout from that shoulder injury and lack of preseason or conditioning as a result of that as well, I suppose. But by the end of the year, in the playoffs particularly, he had 15 points in 11 playoff games.
Zayd is very much a player that relies on confidence to get things going. And in that first rookie year, it felt to me like they didn't really know how they wanted to use him. And as such, he was kind of lost out there a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then second year, when they get Shane Wright and he kind of has a set role on the team, that's when he started to put it all together.
Yeah, confidence goes straight to your feet, doesn't it?
Big time. And especially with him, just talking to him over the years, and when he started to get the confidence of the coaching staff and they were giving him those big moments and those big minutes, that's when he kind of started to blossom as a player and allowed him to get drafted by Philly and signed by Philly.
Right. So he's now aged out of junior hockey, so he'll be playing pro next year. I wouldn't be surprised if Philadelphia decides to not put the pedal to the metal and rush him. I mean, I think he was a fourth round or second. Was he second or fourth round pick?
I think fourth, because I remember them signing him and I was like, whoa.
And he was the first player signed out of his draft year.
They didn't sign their first pick. They signed him. I was like, whoa.
Right. That was my first indication that man, this is going to be good. He's all in on Philadelphia. They're all in on him. But yes, I can see them trying to exercise a little bit of patience and then, maybe having him play a little bit in between the leagues, depending on how, if he plays his way onto the roster and makes it impossible for them to keep him off, like Jason Robertson did last year, then, okay, so be it. But I could see them being quite prepared to be patient with him as well.
And I think this year, if he's not injured, he's probably starting up in either Lehigh or Philadelphia.
Yeah.
But because of the injury, they said, okay, we'll let you go back to Kingston. You can get your conditioning and stuff there. And then if they happen to go on a playoff run and Kingston gets beat out, we'll call you up.
Yeah. And what surprised me that he came back to the OHL this year was he played more than 25 games in the American Hockey League last year. So he had earned their special COVID exemption that he would have been allowed to play in the American Hockey League. So at the start of the year, I had some fans asking me, is there any chance when he's healthy, Zayde Wisdom comes back? And I was like, no, no, he's already an American Hockey League player. He's their best player. Like, why would you take a backward step and send him back to junior? But I guess the injury has everything to do with that. And they decided.
Yeah, the injury probably would have put him behind the 8 ball this year. Mm-hmm. And by the time he gets up to speed and stuff, the season would have been winding down. So they send him back to junior where he can kind of go and get a bit of a run in and some experience in that regard, and then come back next year and fully recharged and ready to go.
Right. Plus Lehigh was a bit of a disaster this year.
Yeah, that's being kind to them.
Yeah.
I mean, Philadelphia is kind of a disaster too.
Yeah, they are. They need good players. Okay, so the one more player I want to talk about here, the goalie. So Levi Meriläinen comes in, import player from Finland, property of the Ottawa Senators. I think he was just drafted in 21. So he comes in with a pretty decent pedigree, an NHL drafted goalie. He's got signed goalie, no less, exactly. And really kind of, I think going into the season, people were, the Kingston Frontenacs were one of the CHL's top 10 ranked teams, and they didn't finish there. So a lot of people scrutinized the Frontenacs for not being able to keep the puck out of their net. And I had a couple of fans and a couple of people asking me questions about Levi Meriläinen and saying, it's too bad they didn't get a real goalie. And I'm like, actually, they did. I don't have a problem with the quality of goals that he's letting in. I was really impressed with his play, and he was unbeatable on shootouts and breakaways. Hard to blame the goalie when, you've got a player standing uncontested at the side of the net and, the pass comes across the front of the net and it's a tap-in goal. Like, come on, man. How's the goalie supposed to stop that?
There were a few of those this year.
There were more than one. I can remember more than one. Or when your defenseman passes it from the corner right into the slot and kind of onto the stick of the wrong team. Is that the goalie's fault for letting that play in? I think not.
Those happened in playoffs too.
They did, didn't they? A couple of times. So what's your take on Meriläinen?
So everybody, you touched on it. He's Ottawa draft pick, signed, has all these accolades coming in, and even his showing at the World Juniors, as short as it was, he looked pretty good on that. But my takeaway from him is that he was either really good or he's really bad.
He did let in some stinkers.
There was a consistency issue with that, and to me, that was kind of the biggest thing with him. And he's. It might fall on the team a little bit because they absolutely rode him this year. Mm-hmm. Like he's seen the most starts in a few years that I can remember.
Yeah, they played 68 games. He probably started 62 of them or something like that.
Yeah, and it was just insane. And even some of the games that he didn't start, he wound up coming in relief. And so here's your night off. Not really. We got you. It's so hard because you said it perfectly. Like, you don't want to hang it on the goalie when there's flaws elsewhere. But on the same hand, there were some nights where I'm thinking, okay, this team's in this game if they just get a save. And then they didn't get that save. But then there's other nights where they had no business being in a game and it's because of him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and against teams that they should have smoked and they just take the night off, but he holds them in and they wound up getting the win in that game.
All right. So what's your predictions for Meriläinen for the upcoming season? Where do you see him going? I think he's got some options, right? Because he was drafted out of Europe which means he can play pro.
Ottawa's such a mess in the goal right now, so it wouldn't shock me to see him start in Belleville. There's just so many question marks for the Senators right now, and they really need something solid in the pipes for them moving forward. And like they thought Murray was the solution, he's not. And so I think in that regard, it's wide open. If Maryland wants to come in and steal that, it's up for him to do. It's not like they've got their guy and that's that. Like they're playing for a backup role. I think it's wide open in Ottawa Senators land right now in terms of goaltending.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're trying to get out from Matt Murray's contract. If they don't add another goalie and if they subtract Matt Murray, their depth chart is it's not overwhelming. Anton Forsberg, Philip Gustafsson, Mads Søgaard, maybe Kevin Mandelays. Like, that's it. And then Levi Meriläinen. So, for goalies who turn pro, it's not uncommon for them to go from junior hockey into the coast and get starts as a starting goalie in the East Coast Hockey League and get reps in practice, as opposed to being a backup in the American Hockey League and wasting an important season of development. So I wouldn't dismiss the possibility of him getting starts in the East Coast Hockey League.
And that's exactly it with goaltending. Like, you need to play to get better. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Like, you need starts, you need quality starts to get better. And it's not going to do you any good to be sitting on the bench. So if that's in Belleville or in their American League team or ECHL team, I found out also recently that they do not like to be referred to as the East Coast League. They're just the ECHL now. I got a letter from them regarding that.
Really?
Yeah, legit. Like a big explanation.
What do they think ECHL stands for?
ECHL stands for ECHL. That was their explanation to me. Yeah.
Okay. This is like a KFC branding thing. Like, no, even though Kentucky Fried Chicken, it's KFC. Damn it.
Even though everybody refers to it as the East Coast League, they do not like that. So, I don't even know who Ottawa's East Coast affiliate is right now.
No, neither do I. Nobody knows.
Yeah, it's up for grabs. But I think Belleville probably is the landing spot for him, just because over the last 2, 3, 4 years, there seems to be a rotating goaltending carousel out of there between Ottawa and Belleville. And it seems every year they go through 5 or 6 goaltenders.
Right.
And so I think probably you'll see the most reps in Belleville.
Interesting. Well, that's not far from us. So if we want to go watch Maryland, we can just take a little hour drive west on the 401 and catch a Belleville game. All right. Does that pretty much covers all of the relevant players from the Kingston Frontenacs that have
Haché? We did not touch on Haché.
No, we didn't. Okay, so
he's a wild card for me.
Is he aging out too? He's graduating.
No, I think he's got 1 year left.
He signed I think he signed. I saw on Twitter, I think it was his mom posted that he's off to wherever their
yes, Coast, you know what? Yeah, I did see that in Charlotte.
Yeah, AHL. Yeah, the Chargers. Yeah. So I think that means that he's off to starting his pro career. Here's the way I look at it. If Roland McEwen can't crack the NHL, I'm not sure I see Braden Haché surpassing that.
I would 100% agree. If Steven DeRoche and Roland McEwen can't do it, then that to me says it all.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I like Braden Haché. I think he was one of their best defensemen on a lot of nights, especially when he was really mean and engaged physically.
And he is one of the nicest kids you will meet coming through junior hockey.
No doubt. All right. And then Ben Roger is another Ottawa Senators prospect that they have, a player that the Frontenacs acquired. And he's big. And he was a second round pick, which was a little bit surprising. He went a lot sooner than a lot of people had forecast him, but I think that's part of the pandemic
London
effect.
Bump. Yeah. And the London bump.
Yeah, right. But they traded him to the Fronts. I like what I saw from him, and I think he was just what they needed, a big defensive defenseman. but I don't think he moves the needle on the fantasy radar at all.
No, me neither. I think he's probably going to be an ECHL guy.
Yeah. All right, Allan. I think I'm going to put a wrap on this episode. My free Zoom account is timing out, so and I'm too cheap to pony up. So thanks very much for joining me, man. I really enjoyed talking France with you. I know we do it at Frontenacs games sometimes, but I thought our conversations are so interesting. We should share it with the world. So anyone who wants to listen can.
I thoroughly enjoyed it, and before we know it, we'll be back in rinks. That's one of the benefits of these weird starts to the seasons is a short off season.
Yeah, it's going to be a hard season again next year, though. It's like back in the days where they played that bummer Jerry Seinfeld bass guitar every time the Frontenacs got scored on, which is about 10 times a game.
Well, you know what? If we go on with those expectations and it's better, I think we'll be pleasantly surprised.
There you go. They got a couple players that will be returning that I'll be excited for. I like Maddox Callens and Matt Soto, and they got some young players coming up. They got a first round pick this year, Frasca's younger brother. So
and Battaglia too.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So it won't be all bad, and who knows what it'll be. So if Shane Wright doesn't make the NHL and gets traded for bounty of prospects, it'll make for another run in a year or two.
Can't wait. We don't have enough of those here in Kingston.
All right. So thanks for joining me, Allan. Everyone follow Allan on Twitter. Allan Etmanski is the Twitter handle. Just pretty straightforward. No numbers or underscores or special characters or anything. And thanks for listening to the episode. Hope you enjoyed it. If you do, go ahead and give it a 5-star review or something like that. If you see me posting it on Twitter, hit that retweet or like button. Help share the love so people can find it. All right. That's it for this episode. Got the NHL draft coming up in a couple of weeks now. That is not far away. So I'll be there, and I'll try to do my usual Bob McKenzie interview from the draft and talk to a couple other people who might have some interesting insights for the show, just like Allan did today. So that's it for today, everyone. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next one.